It was just another typical morning at Westfield High, a prestigious and well-known school in Austin, Texas. The hallways buzzed with activity as students rushed to their classes, some standing in tight-knit groups, chatting away about the latest gossip, while others scrambled to complete last-minute homework assignments. The usual morning chaos unfolded like clockwork. But for Jacob Miller, the day carried a weight that set him apart from the rest. Unlike most of his classmates, many of whom were children of doctors, lawyers, and successful business owners, Jacob came from a much humbler background. His grandfather was a farmer, a man who had built his life through grit and perseverance. Jacob's hands, roughened from early morning chores, bore the proof of his labor. His boots, still carrying the faint scent of fresh soil, silently told the story of a boy who had already worked before the school day had even begun. Jacob wasn't the type to speak much, but his quiet demeanor often made him the target of ridicule. That morning, as he walked into his history class, he could already feel the sharp, disapproving gaze of his teacher, Ms. Whitmore. A woman known for her strict discipline, she carried herself with an air of superiority that made even the most confident students hesitate under her piercing stare. The lesson commenced, but Jacob struggled to concentrate. The exhaustion from waking before dawn to tend to the farm animals clouded his ability to focus. His eyelids felt heavy, his mind slow to process the words on the board. Then his name rang out like a snap of a whip. "Mr. Miller," Ms. Whitmore called, crossing her arms. "Perhaps if you spent less time lost in thought and more time paying attention, you wouldn't embarrass yourself. Now answer the question. What was the primary cause of the Civil War?" Jacob hesitated, his mind scrambling to grasp at the fragmented information he had barely absorbed. Pause was too long. A smirk curled on Ms. Whitmore's lips. "Figures," she scoffed. "If you dedicated yourself to your studies instead of whatever it is you do in those fields, maybe you wouldn't be struggling." Laughter rippled through the class. Jacob swallowed hard, his throat tightening. Ms. Whitmore wasn't finished. She leaned back against her desk, shaking her head in mock pity. "Honestly, I don't see the point in wasting time on students who clearly aren't cut out for academics. Perhaps you should stick to what you know best, feeding pigs and digging in the dirt." The room fell into a stunned silence. Even the students who had laughed moments ago now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Jacob slowly rose to his feet, his knuckles turning white from gripping the desk. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "Just because I don't come from money doesn't mean I deserve to be disrespected," he said, locking eyes with Ms. Whitmore. She arched an eyebrow, unfazed. "Then prove it," she challenged. "Otherwise, the door's right there." The words cut deep, but Jacob refused to let them break him. Without another word, he gathered his books, turned on his heel, and walked out, the sound of his own footsteps echoing in his ears. His face burned with humiliation, but inside him, something stronger than shame stirred. The next morning, something extraordinary happened. As the early sunlight cast a golden glow over the school grounds, an unfamiliar sound interrupted the usual chatter. The rhythmic thudding of helicopter blades filled the air, growing louder by the second. Students and teachers rushed outside, their eyes widening in disbelief as a sleek black helicopter descended onto the football field. The door swung open, and out stepped a man of towering presence, James Miller, Jacob's grandfather. Dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had built an empire with his own hands. But he was not just a simple farmer. He was a visionary. His name was known across Texas, not only for his vast farmlands but for his groundbreaking work in sustainable agriculture. His company had revolutionized organic farming, supplying high-end restaurants and major grocery chains across the country. And right behind him, walking with his shoulders squared and his chin lifted, was Jacob. A hush fell over the crowd as the two made their way into the school, students and faculty parting in their path. Even Ms. Whitmore, who prided herself on never being intimidated, looked visibly shaken. Mr. Miller's voice, deep and firm, broke the silence. I was informed there was an issue with my grandson in your class yesterday. Ms. Whitmore blinked rapidly, her usual confidence faltering. Mr. Miller, I assure you, I treat all my students equally. James Miller's lips pressed into a thin line. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded check, holding it up between two fingers. Is that so? He said. Because this school receives a significant amount of funding from the Miller Foundation. In fact, I personally funded the very science lab you take pride in. I also sponsor the history program that you oversee. His gaze hardened. Yet you saw fit to humiliate my grandson simply because of where he comes from? Ms. Whitmore's face paled. Jacob watched as his grandfather continued, his voice unwavering. I raised Jacob to understand that hard work is honorable. Perhaps, Ms. Whitmore, you should take the time to educate yourself on that, rather than looking down on the people who put food on your table. A murmur of agreement rippled through the students. Jacob, who had remained silent up until now, stepped forward. I never asked for special treatment, he said, his voice calm yet firm. I just wanted to be treated with the same respect as everyone else. Ms. Whitmore's shoulders stiffened. She swallowed hard, nodding. I understand. I apologize, Jacob. A small, satisfied smile tugged at the corners of Mr. Miller's lips. Good, he said. Because respect isn't something handed out based on wealth or status. It's something earned through integrity and hard work. And my grandson has both. A wave of cheers erupted from the students, many of them giving Jacob nods of admiration. From that day forward, he walked the halls of Westfield High with his head held high. Not because of his grandfather's influence, but because he had proven something far greater. That dignity isn't measured by textbooks or bank accounts, but by how one carries themselves in the face of adversity.